What happens when a tax is placed directly on buyers? In this video, we'll explore how such a tax affects the market. We'll model the changes to equilibrium, looking at how the tax impacts the quantity sold and splits the burden between buyers and sellers. You'll see how the price buyers pay increases, while the price sellers receive decreases, and how that quantity sold drops as a result. By the end, you'll have a clear understanding of the economic impacts of a buyer-side tax.
Again, as a reminder, we're going to be this per unit tax is a fixed dollar amount in tax paid on every unit purchase. So Philadelphia imposed a 30% tax on every 30-cent tax on every unit sold. This is going to be on the buyer. Right? So the legislative burden says the buyer pays the tax, and so the buyer would have to write, you can think of this as the buyer writing a check of 30 cents for every single bottle that they purchased. All right, so we're going to shift the demand curve for this, but I want to go through an example to think through like why we're going to do that. All right, so the legislative incidence says the tax is on the buyers. So now, suppose that your marginal benefit is $1.10 for a 12-ounce soda. Right, this means that your willingness to pay is at most $1.10 for that soda. Okay, you don't care where that $1.10 has to go to Kroger or the government. You're willing to pay $1.10 at max for that unit. So now, how much are you willing to pay to Kroger for the soda after a 30-cent tax is applied to it? Okay, so pause here, take a few seconds to come up with a number of like what you think you would be willing to pay after this 30-cent tax is applied. Okay, right. So the answer is going to be 80 cents. Right? So you take your willingness to pay after the tax, right? Back up, sorry. You take your marginal benefit from the soda, which is $1.10. Doesn't matter whether you're going to give it to Kroger or you're going to give it to the government. This is the max you're willing to pay. You have to give 30 cents to the government, okay? And so now what's left over after you pay 30 cents to the government, now what are you willing to pay Kroger at max is now 80 cents for that given unit, all right? So for that marginal unit where you're willing to pay $1.10 in total, now after the tax, you're only willing to pay Kroger 80 cents. So for that unit, we're gonna like shift down the demand curve, shift down that willingness to pay by the amount of the tax, okay? All right, so that's gonna be the key here. Why we're going to be shifting this demand curve. All right, so modeling our tax on the buyers, we have a demand and supply for soda in Philadelphia. This is pre-tax, nothing going on here yet with the tax. We have equilibrium with no tax, which is just straight supply and demand. All right. The equilibrium quantity would be 1.4 million bottles per week at an equilibrium price of $1.10. Okay. Now Philadelphia imposes a tax. How do we want to model this? Well, first, we would pick a unit here. Let's just pick this 1.4 millionth unit here. And this is $1.10, right? And so you don't care whether that $1.10 goes to Kroger or the government. That's the most you're willing to pay. So now the most you're willing to pay to Kroger is going to be shifted down by the amount of the tax. Tax equals 30 cents, okay? And that's going to be equal to, if we put a line over here, that 80 cents right there. So that's the thought experiment I just had you do. Right? Now imagine for all of those, every single one, right? This one we're shifting down by 30 cents. This one we're shifting down by 30 cents. This one we're shifting down. This one we're shifting down. We're shifting on all those marginal units of soda, each bottle of soda, down by 30 cents of what someone's willing to pay Kroger. And that means we're going to be left with, see if I can get this right. I got to make a parallel shift down. Like so, all right? And so this will be our demand after tax. Okay? You can think of this as the willingness to pay to Kroger for the price of a soda, okay, of that transaction. Then the buyer, right, would have to pay an extra 30 cents to the government. So the total cost to the buyer is still this blue demand curve. What they have to pay Kroger plus the 30 cents to the government that they would pay. Okay. So key point here, if I show you a graph like this, and I ask you what's the amount of the tax, you would just find some sort of like the vertical distance here between the demand curves is there'd be numbers over here. You can tell here, oh, that 110 minus 80, oh, it's got to be a 30-cent shift. So the amount of the tax is 30 cents. Okay. Now we need to find the equilibrium after the tax. Really easy. You take your new demand after tax. You go to the original supply curve. Where do they cross? Let's put a dot. And now that thing there will be our equilibrium after tax. So we can really quickly bring down a line to the quantity axis. Let's say that is 1.2 million. That will be our quantity after tax. So quantity tax will be that 1.2 million. Quantity no tax will be that 1.4 million. And so we can already see the tax is going to decrease our quantity. Right? We're going to get less consumption of soda because of imposing this tax. It's basically the whole point of this soda tax is to get people to consume less unhealthy soda, sugary soda. And the tax would do that here in this graph. All right, so quantity. Quantity goes down after the tax. Now to get the price the buyers pay and the price the sellers receive. Price buyers, let's do price sellers receive here. That's going to be the easier one. And let's do a pink here, this dot here. We have our equilibrium after tax with our demand after tax and the supply curve. We're going to take that quantity, 1.2, and we're going to come up to the actual supply curve, right? That red supply curve, the original supply curve right there. Bring it over a line. And let's say that is $1. Right, this will be price sellers receive. Okay, I know that it's the price sellers receive because I found it on the supply curve. You think supply curve means sellers. Okay, the price the buyers pay. What I mean by this is the total out-of-pocket cost to buyers of buying a soda. So we can take that quantity of 1.2 million, right, up to the original demand curve, the blue demand curve there. So demand before tax. That's going to tell us the price. Oops. That will tell us the price buyers pay. So let's say that is $1.30. It'll be price buyers pay. We'll be that $1.30. Okay. I know it's the price the buyers pay because it's coming off of that original demand. Demand means buyers. Okay. So that's what trips people up on exam questions is, well, which one do I find for the price buyers pay, price sellers receive? What you want to do, if it's coming from the supply curve, that's seller. If it's coming from the original demand curve, that's buyer. All right, so now we're set. So what this would look like in the real world, so the price you would see at Kroger for your soda would be the $1, and that's what sellers actually receive. Kroger gets to keep that, right? Then the buyer is going to write an extra check of 30 cents to the government for that per unit tax because they bear the legislative burden. Right? The law says they pay, and so the buyer would pay 30 cents to the government. So the total cost to the buyer would be that $1 that Kroger gets plus that 30 cents that the government gets. And that's why we have that disconnect between these two prices is that vertical distance of the tax that's now imposed for that 30 cents. Okay. All right, so to summarize those effects, we had the quantity goes down, we had price buyers pay is going to go up, right? It goes up from $1.10 to $1.30. So consumers, in a sense, are worse off here because they have to pay more for their soda. Price sellers receive. It's going to go down. It goes down from that down from that $1.10 down to $1. So Kroger gets 10 cents lower than they would have pre-tax. And so we can already see that the actual economic burden is going to be shared, right, between these two sides. buyers have to pay higher prices by 20 cents. Sellers get to keep 10 cents lower. That's not good for their profits, right? And so that 30 cents will be shared between the buyers and the sellers here. Okay. Right, so that's going to be the effects that I want you to get off of this graph here, is what's going on with quantities and prices after the tax.